Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
What Waits in the Shadows, Volume 7, Story Number 1. A whole bunch of weird events have been happening around my school lately. I attend Learning Clinic, a co-ed boarding school for kids with learning behavior or social disorders. The only weird thing I have experienced happened yesterday. I was walking from Brooklyn Building to Overlook Building when I saw a thing, perhaps a squirrel or a bird, go darting across the road, which is Route 169. It moved towards me very quickly on the stone path, and I thought that I might be able to catch it as it ran by. On impulse, I stuck my foot out into its way. Upon impact with my foot, the thing, what appeared to be some kind of small animal, went shooting up my leg, made 3 circles around my chest, then zoomed up my neck and jumped, or maybe flew, off the top of my head. The overlook driveway is a 10-foot wide barren rock path, and I searched around for the creature or whatever it was, but couldn't find it. And then it struck me how much the sensation of the thing climbing me had reminded me of receiving an electrical shock, and I was very shaken due to many recent reports of ghostly encounters from my fellow students. I do not believe in ghosts, and thus am hesitant to even classify my encounter with Mystery Mammal as a paranormal experience. However, some things need to be looked at for what they are. And I can honestly say what happened was certainly not in concurrence with the normal way of things as I know it. A couple of minutes passed, and then I observed a second creature running across the street. This one I let pass, though I still couldn't get a good look at it. It looked grayish, probably a quadruped, but I couldn't discern much more than that. It ran down the length of the overlooked driveway and disappeared into Breeze Field, a field behind a residential house. I sat down and waited longer, being in no hurry, and observed 2 more of the things pass. Then realizing I was late for civics, I hurried into the building, shaken, but not really upset. Next story. My friends and I went through a stage where we would hang out a lot at one girl's house. She, her mom, and older brother had lived there since before she was even born. Her father had bought the house and had died a couple of months before my friend Tracy was born. She was always telling us stories about the house being haunted by the ghost of her father, but I never really believed her. Of course, the house did freak me out a bit. I didn't like being alone in any one of the rooms, especially if it was nighttime. One night I was sleeping over. We were all in the TV room, and it was late at night. I needed to go to the bathroom, which was through the kitchen, down the passage, and at the far end of the house. All the lights were off, and the doors between the kitchen, passage, and lounge were closed, because her mother was sleeping. The light for the kitchen was at the door leading to the passage, so I had to walk through the dark kitchen to get to the light switch. When I went into the passage, I closed the kitchen door and hurried down the pitch black passage. All the bedroom doors along it were closed, and went into the toilet. When I came out, I was walking down the passage back to the kitchen when I suddenly felt and heard something rush over my head and down the passage. I didn't really see it with my eyes, but it felt very black and kind of shapeless. Of course, I freaked out and rushed into the kitchen and into the lounge. My friend said to me that was probably your father saying hello. Some hello. Other friends have also had weird experiences in that house, hearing the kitchen chairs moving around when they know they're the only ones there, and that kind of thing. Next story. My experience happened in late October to early November of 1985 or 1986, and for years I have searched the web and reading materials of World War II for information regarding the USS Alabama. I gave up for a while, but recently my interest was aroused again, and there is more information available now on this ship. I toured this ship with my first husband and 2 other couples. No one else was on the ship except the 6 of us, and each couple chose a different route. I believe there were 3 painted lines, red, yellow, and blue, at the beginning of the tour, and each route ran the entire ship, but just not together. Each couple chose a different route, and we did not run into each other again because the ship was so large. A few minutes into the tour, I had the feeling of not being alone, that other people were watching us, and I kept turning around looking for someone, but no one was ever there. This continued throughout the entire tour until my husband started questioning me on why I kept turning around. When I told him, he just scoffed at me. I never heard any voices or saw anyone or anything, but I just had the uncanny feeling of an unseen presence and some sadness. The only noises I remember was something being banged on metal, which I attributed to settling of the ship. At the very end of the tour, just before we were to get off the ship, we saw a sleeping compartment for some sort of lieutenant. I entered the compartment and sat on the bunk for just a second or two. As I was coming out of this compartment, something snatched a diamond earring out of my ear. Not much in pain, but definitely a force, and not just the earring falling out on its own. I was upset because I thought even if I was able to find the earring, I would have to go to a jewelry store to get another back for it because I knew I would never be able to find the tiny little back to it. When we found the earring, it was in a corner 10 to 12 feet from where I had been standing, and the back was still on it. I took this to mean that there definitely had been something or someone on that tour with us, and because my husband kept scoffing at me, this was the other person's way of letting me know I had not been wrong. This next part may just be my imagination, or maybe there could have been pictures of some of the officers on the ship at the time I was there. I don't remember. But for years I've carried the image of a tall, thin-faced blonde officer in my mind. No name, just his face. A few weeks ago, when I began my search again for information on the ship, one website had pictures and biographies of some of the commanders. One is the face I have seen in my mind for years. Unless there were pictures on that ship back in 85 or 86, there is no other place I could have seen that face. None of the books on World War II I have searched through had this man in them. This is the only strange thing that has ever happened to me. I have been to the Winchester Mystery House in California, the Oak Alley Plantation in Louisiana, Civil War battlefield parks, etc. And never, ever has anything even remotely different happened to me. Next story. It was 2002 and I was up at school at Grand Valley State University near Grand Rapids. Just about every night, my roommate, the two girls that lived across the hall at the dorm, and I went to 7-Eleven for lack of anything better to do and our insatiable desire for Slurpees. One night, about the 15th of February, we were on our way back to our rooms around 1 a.m. or so. I was driving Del Fillmore, this dangerously curvy country road that leads to the university, when I saw a woman standing in the road. I hit the brakes, and as I slowed down, I didn't see the woman anymore. I looked around, and as I started accelerating, I looked through the back window over my right shoulder. On the side of the road, I saw a woman there with dark hair and a long, light-colored dress or nightgown. She was looking at me and pointing towards us. I looked at my roommate, who was in the passenger seat, and said her name before I felt foolish and was like, never mind. When we got back to our rooms, I told the other three about it. My roommate seemed to believe me, but the other girls thought I was seeing things. Later that night, while we were going to sleep, I was laying in my bed looking out the window. Our beds were in an L shape, with the head of mine over the head of hers, and mine was right in front of the window. Behind our building was a sidewalk, some trees, and then a rail before a drop-off, where it was all woods. Not many people went back there, especially at night, besides the smokers who stood by the door where I couldn't have seen them. As I looked down out the window, I began to fall asleep. I felt a funny feeling and opened my eyes and looked down. There by a tree was the woman. She was standing there looking just as she had on the road, staring and pointing directly at me. I screamed and jumped out of my bed into my roommate. Before I could tell her about it, we both were unbelievably scared and ran across the hall, banged on the door. We were both crying and half laughing so hard that it took me a while to tell them what I saw. Needless to say, I think we spent the rest of the night in their room. I called my mother, and she told me that she thought that someone must be watching over me, and that I should try to talk to her. I tried a few times, but didn't see her as clearly again. On the afternoon of February 21st at about 2:30 p.m., I was on my way back to work on Fillmore, and I lost control on a curve in the rain and was hit by an oncoming car. I remember hearing my own brakes and then looking to my right where the oncoming traffic was, but instead I saw someone sitting next to me looking back at me. I heard, "It'll be all right." Just before, I don't remember anything else. When the ambulance came, I was very upset and asked where my roommate was because I was sure that she had been in the passenger seat. They told me that no one else was there, and if they had been, there would be no chance of them surviving. I insisted there was, but was repeatedly told no. The hospital. I had many dreams of the woman and the instant when I heard the reassurance. My car, a Mercury Topaz, was totaled. The frame was pushed off of the body, the trunk was practically non-existent, the passenger door was ripped from its hinges, and the entire car compacted. Mysteriously, the driver's area, from the gear shift to the steering wheel and seat, were completely intact, with not a thing wrong with them besides what the jaws of life had done to get me out. I suffered a lacerated spleen, lacerated kidney, punctured and collapsed lung, severely broken ribs, and other internal injuries because my seatbelt had not held and I was tossed to the back. My parents were told I had a 22% chance of living and was touch and go for over a week. Today, everything has healed 100% and I have no lasting evidence of the accident besides pictures of my car and a tiny scar from a breathing tube. The doctor said they had never seen such a recovery. By all rights, I should be dead. But I believe the woman was warning me. Then she comforted and protected me, and she is the reason I'm still alive today. I have never seen her or any other spirit or ghost, whatever you want to call them, before or after this accident. Next story. We lived in this big house in Scott Township on Swallow Hill Road. We were only the second owners of this house. The original owner was laid out in the living room when he died. There was a graveyard right behind our house, about 50 yards away. If you walked out the back door in a straight line, you would have walked directly on my sister's grave. This house was extremely haunted. Things happened constantly, in the day and night. Everyone was scared to stay in the house by themselves, including my stepfather, who was a police officer. Friends had things happen to them while they were there and would no longer step on the property. I would have to meet them in front of my house off the property. This house had hardwood floors and a very big kitchen, basement, two big fireplaces, and heated floors. At night, we would have all of the chairs pushed in at the kitchen table. Then during the night, almost nightly, you could hear the chairs move and slide around the kitchen floor. Dishes would move around also, from one counter to the next. If you started down the steps, it would stop. You would push all the chairs in, walk upstairs, and it would start all over again. When I would go to sleep sometimes, I would feel a very hard tap on my shoulder, like a finger. If I didn't look, it would just keep tapping my shoulder until I looked. When I looked, no one would be there. Then it would stop, as long as I looked. On other occasions, I had my blankets ripped off of me and laid out completely flat on the floor. I had this happen many times. When I laid my head on my pillow, I would sometimes hear voices that hurt my eardrum, like someone was flicking it. I couldn't understand the voices. I would have to throw my pillow on the floor and not use it at night when this would happen. I also had my bed shake during the daytime, and only when my brother was present. Stuff would happen daily to everyone who lived there and people who visited. This was the most haunted house I have ever lived in, and I don't ever want to again. I was scared every day. Like I said, it didn't matter if it was night or day, it was constant. There's more I could tell you, but I would have to write a book. So I'll leave you with what I feel will give you an understanding of the word haunted. Next story. Growing up, I heard that the high school was haunted by a former student. Apparently, the student was struck in the head with a shot put during gym class and died. Although occasionally you would hear a rumor of this haunting, I never heard of a specific incident. I didn't take this story seriously until I had an experience around November 1987. I was a senior in high school at the time and a drummer for our jazz ensemble. Within the jazz ensemble, four of us got together to form a jazz combo band. We would practice at various places, but sometimes we would meet at school to practice in the band or chorus room. I think it was over Thanksgiving vacation when we scheduled of practice for either a Friday or Saturday morning. All but one of our members showed up on time, and after tuning and warming up for a while, we decided to go call to see where Mark was. This was before the age of cell phones, so we went out to the payphone, which was located next to a series of doors leading directly into the gymnasium. Although all the other hallways were dark, the area where we were located was well lit. Next to the gymnasium, a set of steps went down to where the locker rooms and some classrooms were located. The steps were closed off by a large accordion-style gate. After we called Mark's house, he told us he was on his way, so we decided to wait there for him. While we waited and talked, we thought we heard some noises coming from the gym or downstairs. It sounded like someone walking or running, and then it would stop. As we waited, leaning against this large gate, we heard the noise again, but this time it seemed to be coming from right behind the door next to us. Instantly, we got quiet and looked at the door in shock. Within a split second after this, the door jolted and flew open towards us. We were all hit by a cold wind across our bodies. Instantly, we all jumped and started running down the hallway in fear for our lives. All three of us were sprinters in track, and I believe we would all have set state records for how fast we ran that morning. After a lot of swearing and freaking out, we went back down and the door was closed. We watched from a distance to see if it would happen again, but it didn't. No one else was in the school at the time, and we know our friend didn't have anything to do with it. Our only guess is this was the ghost of the student watching over the school. A year later, while I was in college, I worked one summer at the school as a janitor. I shared this story with the full-time janitors, and they said they had experiences where doors would open and close behind them and felt like they were being followed. Next story. This is a true and accurate event that even I wouldn't believe if I hadn't been there and had my mother with me at that time to reassure me that it did indeed happen and that I am not crazy. Both my mother and myself work at the American Legion Post number 6. This particular post is in a 100-plus-year-old building, and it has been a private club for the military men since it opened. A lot of military men and their families have held memberships at this club for decades, and many of those have passed on from battle and from old age alike. So you can imagine the energy that runs through this place. Well, one night at around 1 a.m. after our shift, we were the bartenders. We were sitting at the end of the bar counting out our tills and talking about the usual gossip when all of a sudden, directly above our heads, one of the speakers started booming very loud and methodically. Needless to say, we were both startled, and because of previous experiences that we and other employees had, neither one of us was in a big hurry to go to the stage and check the plugs to be sure that the band hadn't left the mic plugged in. It sounded like the same kind of boom that the kids play through their speakers in the cars when they drive. Well, anyway, I decided I wanted to get the heck out of there, and I knew we couldn't leave and let the building catch fire because we were too scared to unplug the darn equipment. So I started toward the stage very quickly, while telling myself that it was silly to be afraid, and I needed to just do it and get it over with. When I got to the stage, I climbed up the front because I sure as heck wasn't about to go around behind the curtain. I went over to the place where the surge protectors were plugged in, and nothing was still plugged in. As I turned around, I started getting very sick to my stomach, and a sort of dread rushed through my body. When I looked out across the dance floor to where my mother was, right there, in front of me, was a man about 6 feet tall and dressed in a brown flannel shirt with a pair of old tattered pants. I stopped breathing, and I don't know how long it was before my mother had seen what was going on as she yelled, "Hey, how the hell did you get in here? We're closed, and we already locked up." It was then that he just faded. I was in hysterics and my mom was in shock, so we ran for the door. As she was digging in her bag for the keys so we could leave, the door unlocked and violently swung open. We didn't hesitate to get out. Behind us, the door shut and locked all in one motion, and on the other side of the glass door was the man in the flannel shirt scowling at us. The next morning, we went in to let our manager know what happened, and she had a surprise for us. The tape from the security camera showed exactly what happened, only instead of the man, it was a foggy light. After we had left, the cameras continued to tape the tables sliding around and glasses being knocked off the shelves. We did continue our jobs there and eventually we moved on. Nothing as dramatic as that winter night ever happened to us again, but still, all of us continued to see, hear, feel, and know that we were not ever alone. Next story. This happened during my summer trip to my relative's place. My grandaunt lives in this lovely town surrounded by a forest-covered mountain range. I've always loved trekking there and have even camped out overnight with my cousins. And this was my umpteenth trip. A cousin of mine and I were planning to leave on a 3-day trekking and camping trip into the jungle. At the last moment, my cousin ditched me, taking off for the weekend with his girlfriend. And now I was stuck with a camping trip ahead of me, but no company. I decided to go ahead on my own. Now, I was all of 22 years of age and at 5 feet 10 inches and packing a solid 80 kilos. I thought I could take care of myself. Nevertheless, I packed a Swiss Army knife, a machete, and a solid bamboo stick just to be on the safe side. The trip started off well, and by evening I had made good ground. But then, with a failing light, my nerves started giving out and I realized I was in the middle of a jungle, all by myself. But, being a brave young and foolish lad, I went on. I camped after a while in this natural clearing in the midst of a thickly wooded area. Soon I had a roaring campfire going and settled down, leaning against my backpack, helping myself to tinned pineapple slices. The fire and the ambiance soon drove away the fear. The food was done with and I settled down to enjoy a calming smoke. Oh, how I missed that damn habit. Sometime later I thought I saw something unusual on the other side of the fire. Not being able to get a clear view because of the heat haze, I got up. I got the scare of my life when I saw a boy, which must have been 7 to 8 years of age, clad in just a white loincloth, sitting very still on a rock on the other side. He was staring straight into the fire. I called out to him in a variety of languages, but just didn't get a response. The rock he was sitting on was in the midst of a muddy and slimy patch, and so I couldn't approach him either. So I settled myself down. The boy just didn't move and went on looking into the fire. I was really spooked and just sat there smoking one cigarette after another. This went on for more than a couple of hours. Finally, feeling the fatigue of the day catching up with me, I cuddled up with my machete and went to sleep. The morning scene was predictable enough. Smoking ashes, dew on the grass, etc. And of course, the kid had disappeared. I went close up to the rock and examined the surroundings. Not a single footstep or mark. Spooky experience? So did I then dream up the entire thing? No way. I had a dozen cigarette stubs lying around as proof of those 10 sleepless hours. And that's the end of the story. I asked around a lot but couldn't trace the story of a lost 8-year-old boy, living or dead. Maybe someday I will, but then this remains a mystery. However, it definitely made a believer out of me. Next story. In the summer of 1999, my roommate and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in the Prospect Heights section of Brooklyn. We had the entire garden level. You entered under the stoop, plus the basement. The evening before we moved in, I was painting my bedroom, and out of the blue, I just felt really cold. This was during a July heat wave. A creepy cold ran down my spine, and I turned around, and I just felt the cold coming from a corner of the room. I wasn't scared so much as sad. It was a very lonely feeling. When we moved in, I bought some sage and burned it through the house, and it seemed to work for a few weeks. Then I felt it again, so I took to burning sage quite a lot. Then the laundry list of things started happening. 1. The door to my bedroom came off its hinges and fell on me when I was closing it. 2. The microwave broke. 3. The TV broke. 4. The CD player broke. 5. The ceiling collapsed in my bedroom. 6. The sewage pipe burst in the basement and it was flooded with 6 inches of raw sewage. 7. The electricity went on the fritz constantly. 8. No matter how we set it, the refrigerator froze and the freezer refrigerated. 9. My bedroom window broke while I was away. 10. If you stood in a certain part of my bedroom, you could smell this rotten smell that I can only liken to a dead mouse rotting. It could have been a dead mouse, but they decompose in less than 2 months. This went on for nearly 2 years. Some of this clearly had to do with an old house, but so much in such quick succession made us question what was happening. Also, appliances working one day and then just not turning on the next didn't make sense. I would be sleeping, and more than once suddenly in my dream there would be a screaming in my ear, and I would wake up with a start. It never happened anywhere else before or since, just when I slept there. Other times, I would awake to the sensation that someone was bouncing on my bed. After the door fell off its hinges, I hung a curtain for privacy. When I would awake in the night from the screaming, the curtains would be blowing about like crazy. Towards the end, I was sleeping in the living room. We found another apartment and paid two rents for the last 2 months. The only experience my roommate had was overly large mosquitoes that seemed to come from no place and every place. They kept themselves to a room, and at night they drove her crazy. One night I was at my neighbors upstairs, and they sheepishly told me that they thought the building was haunted, and they related to me similar experiences to my own. Someone previously had installed the doorknob backwards with a lock on the outside of one of the bedroom doors. The girl kept getting locked in, and then mysteriously the door would unlock, and she could get out. Next story. First, a bit of background. I live in a fairly small town in the northeast of Scotland, popular with tourists, very picturesque, etc. The high street is the main town centre and has three pubs spaced along it. My partner works as a bar manager in the last pub as you leave the high street, the Douglas Arms. The building is one of the older ones in the town. It was a coaching stop on the way to Balmoral, and also at one point had its own brewery on the site, and is a real rabbit warren of rooms and old doorways. The interior has changed at least twice in the last 16 years, with new rooms being created and the function of others changing. When the landlord and landlady decided to go on their first family holiday in years, they asked my partner Harry and the head chef Taddy to cover for them and stay in the hotel rooms above the pub. I decided to stay too, and Harry and I took room 8 on the left-hand side of the hotel at the back, just over the lounge bar. Knowing that when people are staying in the rooms above the lounge, you can hear stairs creaking, etc., I was expecting to hear all the bar noise from downstairs. I didn't go to bed until almost closing time if I could help it. The first night I went upstairs to bed alone while Harry and Taddy closed the other bar and checked that everything was locked up. As I was drifting to sleep, my heart began racing and I found it difficult to breathe. I just put this down to being in a strange room for the first time and tried to sleep again. I'd barely closed my eyes when I began to hear two voices, one male, one female, and they seemed to be arguing, although the sounds were muffled as if I was listening through a wall. I also didn't dream at all. Everything was black behind my eyes, highly unusual for me as I have the most vivid dreams. This was pretty freaky, as I knew that no bookings had been taken for the week, and the rooms on either side were empty. Plus the floors creaked so loud I could hear anyone walking in the hall or to the other rooms. Needless to say, I had a really crappy night's sleep, but managed to get up at 6 a.m. and go to my own work. All day I felt uneasy and watched. My heart would keep racing too. I got back to the pub and decided to go up to the room alone and get changed. As I walked into the room, I felt my pulse race again. Putting it down to too little sleep, I ran a bath. I left the bathroom doors open so I could hear the TV and just tried to relax in the water. I am quite tall, so I couldn't get stretched out in the bath, so I was lying on my back with my legs bent and to the left, and I was trying to read a book. All of a sudden, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye just by the doorway. Turning my head, I couldn't see anything and put it down to reflection from the TV or something. Then it happened again. So I put my book down and watched the doorway. When I did this, I realized that it couldn't be the TV screen flickering as it was pointed towards the bed. After having a long night and an even longer day, I was rightly hacked off, so I said out loud, "Piss off and leave me alone." Nothing else happened until later when I went to bed alone again. As I drifted off, I had the same pulse racy feeling again. Then the voices came again, a little clearer this time, but speaking in the same pattern. Definitely an argument, but I still couldn't hear what was being said. This time there was also a light behind my eyelids, like watching through a hood or from under a sheet. I don't sleep like this because I hate having my head covered. After having another crappy night's sleep, I asked my partner what he thought, and he told me to ask Taddy what he thought. Taddy told me that the room we were staying in was right next to the landlady's room, and one of the first times she had locked up at night, incidentally, she didn't anymore. She had heard an argument coming from behind the door of our room. Thinking that maybe it was domestic between two residents, she tried to ignore it. While trying to ignore it, she was also listening, as you do when there's gossip. but couldn't hear the actual words through the wall. She also heard the TV being turned up louder and louder. Now, believing them to be causing a disturbance to the other guests and possibly about to hurt each other, she went out into the hall and knocked on the door. There was no answer, so she called out for them to keep the noise down and went back to her room. After a few more minutes, the din started up again, so she went down and got the master key, announced she was coming in, and unlocked the door. She found the room empty, the bed made, and the TV off. No one was booked to stay in that room. After I'd been told this, I freaked out. I'd been hearing the same noises. Apparently, way back, the room upstairs hadn't been divided into guest rooms and were used as a conference room for private parties. One night, after one such party, a man had discovered his wife had cheated on him at the party, and they got into an argument, resulting in him strangling her. We haven't found any exact reference to this incident, but there have been murders at the pub. One such incident happened back when the pub was still a hostelry, stabling horses and carriages round the back with a large courtyard where the restaurant now stands. In modern times, the first barmaid in the morning would always find a half pint of export or draught bitter sitting on the edge of the bar, normally reserved for staff to put drinks and cigarettes. The drink appeared just to have a sip taken from it. The lounge doesn't have a tap for export, so this would have had to come from some other bar on the other side of the pub, and none of the staff working there at the time would drink export, and certainly wouldn't leave it for the first shift to clean up. It was later discovered that a barmaid had been working one morning and had just poured herself a half pint when a man came into the courtyard on his horse. He obviously wasn't happy with the animal or something because he took his whip and began to beat the poor thing with it. Not wanting to get involved, the barmaid took a sip of her drink and watched from the window, now a serving hatch. After watching for a few minutes, she decided to intervene, left her beer on the end of the bar, and went into the yard. The horseman turned on her, and after killing his horse, he beat her to death with the same whip. I would love to find out if there's any truth to that story, but I believe it is.